I was like, well, when you take care of the dying all the time, you learn a thing or two about living. And these patients, their families have taught me so much just about being present, about knowing what's important to you, about reshuffling through your priorities. Like when patients are faced with their own mortality, they get this extreme clarity on what's important, what they value, and what's no longer needed or necessary in their lives.
What is your why? Why do you do what you do? Why did you decide that this is where you belong, where you need to be? It is a powerful place when you have that shift that just makes it all seem so right. When the why becomes more like a why not? It's just a knowing, right? When I first met Dr. Kathy Zhang not too long ago, I was fascinated by her. Her want and desire to go into palliative care. And I have always thought that there's something really special about people who focus on providing that support and comfort for the dying, especially when it's children or the elderly. And for Kathy, it was that why, that purpose. So that is where we're going on Holistically Speaking this week. We're going to talk about what she learned from her patients and their families. That is a constant reminder of her why role models are so important. And we even toss around some of our favorite quotes, which I love, that may touch, move, and inspire you in some way. A nice spiritual volley of sorts. Plus a confession from the doctor that she shares for the first time ever that makes her why even more empowering when it comes to living an authentic and aligned, purpose-filtered life. When you and I were first chatting, it was prior to me losing my stepdad, who passed away, Alzheimer's dementia, lived a long time, 92 years old. And I think it was probably 6 days later he passed. And I really wanted to cover this topic. So I'm really excited that you're here to talk about palliative care. You are a doctor yourself. You see this every day. You work at Bellevue. And this is a topic I think needs to be addressed because how we as family deal with death is one thing, but how are we supporting those who are getting ready to make that transition to the other side? And so first, let me just say thank you for being here. Second, let me say thank you for the work that you do. And thirdly, we're going to talk about you being that purpose filter coach that you are, which is a whole nother area. So let's do this.
Yes.
That's quite an introduction.
Thank you so much for having me. Well, when you do the work that I do, it tends to be what follows. But thank you so much for having me on here. I'm so excited to talk with you. Yeah. And, thank you for sharing about your stepfather. I can't imagine what it's like to kind of have to go through that, especially with Alzheimer's, because it can be a long kind of course in terms of just the deterioration that you see a lot of times. And so in terms of what you were asking, like, how do we support the people who are going through it, the family members, but also the people themselves? I mean, that's kind of why I got into this work in the first place, is really just being there, being present. I used to work as a hospitalist, meaning I would take care of patients who were sick enough to be hospitalized, but I would have like 20 patients a day, and I couldn't spend that much time with them. And I realized it was the times where I could spend 5, 10, 15, 20, 30 minutes, which was a lot for me per patient. That's when I really got to feel that like I was connecting with that person, with that patient. And so really just being present, asking difficult questions and having difficult and honest conversations, I think is really that first step to be able to be like, okay, let's unpack a little bit of that. What's underneath all of this? And how can we, create a plan that helps you live according to your values?
What you do is such important work. I think during the pandemic, I've gained such an unbelievable amount of respect, even further than I had before. And being in the healthcare work myself as a holistic practitioner, seeing how much doctors and first responders really needed support and the kind of emotional toll it took on those that are working in. You didn't get days off, there was no like stay at home, work from home kind of remote.
No.
So, not even knowing that a pandemic was coming, what made you choose to go into the work that you do as far as palliative care? Because the two areas that I think are the most difficult to work with, and you feel like if you're a real empath, you feel, are the elderly and children, because they are really the most, those who need the most, So choosing that, where did that really come from for you?
That's a great question. It was partially because I felt like I was really good at helping people move through the revolving door of healthcare, right? Like they would get sick, they had an infection, I would treat it. They had a heart failure problem, I would treat that. And then I would send them out on their way and they would come back in eventually for something else. And I just felt like I wasn't having the types of conversations that I wanted to have. I wasn't having the type of impact within medicine that I wanted to have. And that's why I went into it in the first place. I went into medicine because I wanted to, right some unprofessional wrongs that I had seen when I was a kid. I wanted to save people and heal people. And I just felt like I wasn't doing that. And when it comes to the elderly, the children, I mean, I'm like an empath all the way, right? I'll cry in life insurance commercials, dogs reuniting with military veterans and they come home and I'm just like, I'm a mess. So,
and that's that commercial, really that Sarah McLachlan commercial with the ASPCA. You know which one I'm talking about?
Oh my God, yes.
I can't even hear that song anymore.
Of course.
So I hear you on that one.
No, and then it's just like, absolutely. And so I felt like I just wanted to do something more. And what I love about palliative care and hospice is that everything is real. Everything is raw. Everything is just like a heightened version of what we experience on a daily basis, right? You want to talk about love. You want to talk about grief. You want to talk about anger. Like I have gotten very, very angry people on the other side because, you're dealing with life and death. What's more important than that? And so that's what really attracted me to it. And that's what makes me love it so much. It's just like, I'm here for all of the real stuff, no pretenses, no BS. Like, let's talk, let's figure this out. Let's be human together.
Oh God, that's it. It's like, we're all just walking each other home. That's one of my favorite quotes. And that goes back to, isn't that great? It was Ram Dass's book, Spiritual Guru, but I think it even goes back to Rumi. But that whole idea of just, we're here together. And ideally we are born and we're all going to die. And how we live that journey in between is really up to us, which kind of goes into what you're doing now. And that is building the purpose filter life, right? The podcast that you have, working as a coach, being able to support people on a different level where you're also a physician, like a doctor. But where did that move happen? Because that's quite a different change.
Yeah. And so what I've shared before is that during the pandemic, I had a really, really tough time. And you mentioned it just before in your question about like leaving behind this like version of ourselves that we thought the world was fine. And I started palliative care. I'd been a physician in another field before that, and I started it in August of 2019. And then obviously March happened, and I was having a really, really tough time. I was in a really deep, dark mental headspace just because of all the trauma. And I got a lot of therapy, coaching. And from that, I realized that I have something unique to share. I have this unique vantage point not everyone has the kind of access that I do, and surely not everyone wants to have the interactions that I have, but I feel blessed to be able to do it. And so I was like, well, when you take care of the dying all the time, you learn a thing or two about living. And these patients, their families have taught me so much just about being present, about knowing what's important to you, about reshuffling through your priorities. Like, when patients are faced with their own mortality, they get this extreme clarity on what's important, what they value, and what's no longer needed or necessary in their lives. And I was like, if I could just take those lessons and shift it 20, 30, 40 years earlier so that the rest of us, while we're still alive, can still benefit from these lessons. So we're not living with the regret that I do see some of my patients come to at the end of their life when they're like, oh, I wish I knew this years ago so that I wouldn't be suffering in the way that I am now, not just physically, but emotionally, spiritually, mentally, whatever that is. And so that's kind of how the purpose filter was born.
One of my favorite quotes, I'm throwing out another quote, let your passion be your purpose.
Love it.
And one day it'll be your profession. And while you're speaking and you talk so eloquently and beautifully and passionately about the purpose filter life, that quote just resonates with me so much with you, because I'm thinking to myself, here's a woman, you have a successful career as a doctor, you're doing such beautiful, honest work, yet you're like, but I've seen so much, and how can I hold space for people on a much greater level outside of what I'm already doing? Because it makes so much sense. Like, you don't want to be on your deathbed and be like, why didn't I do this, and that? And being able to witness that and see that for so long, it hits me, because I feel like I hear that a lot from people that have lost somebody. Like, we sit here and we have that second, we take a step back, like, oh, you start thinking about things. Well, that's one thing. It's one thing to think about it in the moment, and maybe that's your clientele, really. Like, how can I live my life? What's my purpose? What's my passion? I see that a lot with my clients. But you have this level, this additional level of like, yeah, I've seen this. I've been holding the hand of somebody in their last breath, on their deathbed. And that's not the place you want to be asking those questions, because that, to be filled with regret and upset and what could I have done differently, is a really, it's a powerful thing to have to witness over and over, So this sounds like a really beautiful journey for you, because you're able to put your passion and purpose together yourself, and fuse that into a profession. So how is that for you when you hear that quote?
When you were saying that, it was making me think of another quote recently, and I was just trying to bridge, my work life and also this other part of me. I don't know if you watch this show on Netflix. It's called Blown Away. It's like a reality competition show about glass makers and stuff. If you like The Great British Bake Off, it's very similar. I love The Great British Bake Off, but it's a competition and they're making glass, and glass breaks. And that's part of the drama when they're trying to put out these pieces that they're almost done, and then it shatters on the floor. But one contestant said it best. He was like, if glass didn't break, it wouldn't be valuable. And what you were saying about how when people lose someone, like, we don't have to wait for a traumatic event or a brush with death to be able to use these lessons, to be able to apply them to our own lives. But so often that's what happens. And it isn't until that happens that we're like, oh shoot, like I need to like step it up. I need to figure some stuff out. Like things have got to change. The status quo doesn't work anymore. And so that's why I wanted to do this, to really, in a sense, metaphorically, or, shake people in the shoulders and just be like, there's life ahead of you. You've got something beautiful here. It is a pleasure. It's a blessing to wake up each day, look down, and have your feet come up, be above ground. And I think a lot of us take that for granted.
Definitely. That's a visual. To be able to be a doctor full time and still do what you're doing, and then find space for personal time, and then decide that you want to also do coaching. How in the world is Kathy going to manage all that and still have time for self-care? I'm just curious.
With difficulty, Hilary, with difficulty. I'm not going to sit here and paint a picture like I have the best, of everything. It is difficult. And at the same time, I recognize that it's a marathon, not a sprint, that I need to prioritize certain parts, certain chapters of my life. I love thinking about life in chapters, how this chunk in time, this moment, I'm going to focus on a handful of things. For me right now, it's the podcast, coaching, and then my work. And then later on in life, it'll be something else. And, that's what I've been trying to think about going forward is how do I live my life in alignment with my values, in alignment with what's important to me. And I think a lot of people get lost. Like, I was talking to someone recently and I was like, what do you do for fun? And she literally was like, I don't know, what makes you passionate? And she was just like, I don't really know. And that was me 4 or 5 years ago. I was in the same place. And so it's really about circling back to what really brings us joy, what lights us up on the inside, and then making a decision that that's what you're going to focus on moving forward. But yeah, it's not always easy, but I love it. And it makes me happy to do it.
Well, let me just say it's absolutely 100% possible. That wasn't a trick question because, look, I did it. I mean, I've been a journalist my entire adult career, and I made that transition into holistic health. I don't know, 2016, 17, I started kind of gradually getting in there. And then I realized, and I think it just goes back to that quote, the passion, purpose, profession, because you can, when people say, oh, you're not doing this anymore, or, oh, you're not a doctor anymore, which is impossible, right? It's not giving up something, but rather connecting things together so that those things can align together. I'm not giving up the journalism to become a holistic health coach and holistic practitioner. I'm using my tools and what I have, like what I've been learning how to do for so long, to be the platform to share this, and this, and then still hold space for your private clients or your patients. And it's possible. So when you love something enough, right? Like when you just have that passion for it, it kind of just falls into place, like you said, alignment. So, but everything takes time, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It totally does. And I love what you were saying about kind of like expanding outwards. I think about expanding our identities because I know, especially for a lot of people who leave a former profession, they're like, who am I if I am not a doctor, a broadcast journalist, or any of this stuff? And then there's this internal turmoil that goes on, and then imposter syndrome sets in and all of this stuff. But I think if we can just think about it as physician or whatever your job was before, or this part of your identity and whatever else you're building, then it feels like you're not letting go of the past, but like you said, all of these parts of our prior life up until now combine and coalesce into this living organic thing that then you can bring out into the world.
It's life experiences. It makes us all part of who we are becoming, and no two people are the same. You and I could both be doctors in the same area, in the same hospital, in the same ward, and also be coaches, but your life experiences are going to be different from mine. I mean, you mentioned in our conversation we had prior to this about, being the Tiananmen Square, being a single, like an only child, how that's very common with your culture. That's something completely different from what I'm used to. And I'm curious how that's been a part of of your story, because it's really all about our stories and what we can share and how we can hold space for others. So how's that impacted you, being who you are?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think that's something you do really well on your podcast, is just like highlighting and sharing people's stories
Thank
and
you.
giving them a voice to be able to do that. And so in terms of the Tiananmen Square thing, like I was saying that my dad came to the States from China. He had no intention of moving here. He was going to, continue his life and just be in China. And then that happened and he was like, I can't stay in this country anymore. That fired upon, its own citizens like that. And so that one decision totally changed the trajectory of our family's life, for generations. And when I was a kid growing up, it was so difficult. I was like one of maybe 3, 4 Asian kids within my entire class. I was bullied every single day for years and years. Like, they would call me names, they would throw things at me. They would, like, it was rough. And I think back then it felt so isolating. It still does now, but I think because of the internet and how connected we are, a lot of times there's more of a like, hey, I'm going through this too, right? But back then it was like the 90s, I just felt super alone. And I remember thinking like, who are the role models that I have to look up to that looked like me, that sounded like me? It was Asian females. It was like Michelle Kwan, Chrissy Yamaguchi. I was like, I'm not a figure skater. I fall on my butt every time. I'm not going to work. Lucy Liu, I was like, okay. And then it was like Mulan, and a quarter of these people that I just listed, one of them is a fictional animated character. And I was like, I wanted to see more people who looked like me doing the things that I could see myself doing. And so part of this journey has really been recognizing that, like, hey, maybe it's possible for me to be the role model that I wanted to see when I was younger, right? There was the possibility that, like, maybe if someone sees me when they're young, they're like, hey, I could do that. I could start a podcast. I could be a physician. I could do X, Y, and Z. And that's one of my biggest whys. My purpose is when things get tough and I'm like, I can't do this, it's not working or whatever, I just go back to that and be like, all right, you know what? Just take a deep breath. I'm going to be a role model. I am my own role model. I am my own possibility of what can be done if you believe in yourself, if you have the courage to act on the things that you really want.
I am my own possibility. That's awesome. I love that. That is like, wow. There's a quote that I feel like we're like on quote central here. I keep starting sentences.
I know, right?
There's this quote, but it's so true. I mean, that just says something. Like, to be someone who is quoted, I think so many times about the people who I quote, how they have left their mark or resonated or amplified or created that ripple effect. And I want to be that. I want to do that, not to be quoted per se, but it's much like what you're saying. How are you going to leave your mark in this world? And to go back to the quote I was about to say, it's you know what? I actually forgot what it was. Because I feel like I just have my head, like, there's just so much that we can do, and there's so much that is important for us to do to leave our mark because of these exact things you're saying. To be able to have a young Chinese girl, a Chinese girl look at you and say, oh my gosh, I can be a doctor, or I can amplify by having a podcast, or I can just be a neuroscientist, or whatever they want to be, just a stay-at-home mom, be a great mom, even just to let them know they can be what they want to be, and not just little girls either, right? It's just holding space to say you can be whatever you want and have those role models out there. I totally resonate with that, because when people ask me why you do what you do, it's it's that exact reason. If you can touch, move, and inspire one person, then you've made a difference to that one person, you know? And to have only 4 people as role models, well, it's great if you have just one, right? But when we see how many role models there are out there of all different cultures, where are we lacking? And where can we aspire to create more possibilities? And why does it have to be someone famous? You know, there's just,
exactly.
Yeah. A little girl could look up to you and see you in your white doctor's coat, and that can make an impact on her for the rest of her life. Even if you're just walking into the hospital and she sees you crossing the street, that can make an impact. You know, doesn't that like sits with me right there? Like, we have a responsibility, Kathy, right?
Yeah. I know that that's important to you too. Just like the kind of being a role model. And I think when you were talking, what came to me was the word legacy, right? Like, what's our legacy? What's the story that we write for ourselves, but what also stays behind once we physically leave this world? And I love Robin Arzon. I just love her vibe, her energy, just everything that she says. And she's always like, I want you to ask this question, like, why not me? Why not you? Why not any of us?
Right.
Right.
Exactly. Why not you? And what you said before, like, what is your why? Well, the why is why not me? That's one of the whys. Or even what you said about it being your possibility. And I just remembered what the quote was. It basically was something I always say to my students, which is, you are your own proof. I say it all the time. And it's so true, because you are your proof positive, right? Nobody else can like change that formula. Nobody else knows it as well as you do. So when you say the possibilities and what is your why, the why is because I can, and why not, right? So powerful. And it gets me totally jazzed. And like, I get so excited about that when that's the rocket fuel for me. And it seems that that's for you as well, is that we have this responsibility, you know, we really do. There's a lot of coaches out there. A lot of people are joining this coach thing, which is great, because who might be right for you might not be right for me, and vice versa. And as long as people are coming from an authentic place, but I guess we can't really worry so much about where others are coming from, and just really focus on where we're coming from. And then you'll find your people, you know? Yeah.
Yeah. 100%.
So
they gravitate towards
totally. You. So why purpose filter?
That's a good question. So I had some other iterations of what the title was going to be, but I realized that at the end of life, people have a suspicion throughout their life of what their purpose is, but it's not until they are staring at the possibility that the life that they know now is going to end, that they can look back and do something called a life review. And they look back at their life, and then they can be like, oh, that was the reason why I was alive. That was the reason. And it's always in service of someone else. It's always in service of others. It's never selfish. It's always like, I, raised really good children, or I contributed to my community and I gave back. I made an impact on someone. I saved someone's life. I've had a bunch of patients who just ended up helping out a stranger, and through their 60, 70, 80 years of life, even young people, they were like, that's the reason why I was alive. And so that was the purpose part. And the filter part was really just thinking about it as an Instagram filter or any sort of filter, to really use that as perspective, to say like, hey, this is how you could be looking at life. This is the filter the lens through which you can see life and all the possibilities. And so if you just change your filter, if you change the lens, then you might find more clarity, you might find more peace, you might find more purpose. And it's all about the way that we look at life, and not necessarily what's happening around us, but the way that we interpret everything that's coming to us.
And when you bring up Instagram too, or any of the social media, the other side of that is like all the filters we put on and kind of not show up truly for ourselves. So there's another side to that, like just being organically, authentically yourself, knowing your core values, and how do you want to show up with those values for the rest of your life and not wait till you're taking those final moments and those final breaths. So yeah, did it take you a long time to come to that as the name of your business and being that coach? It's fun to find the name.
Yeah, it is fun to find a name. I'm the type of person that I need to have, it's like always percolating on the back burner in the back of my mind. And it's not until I can sit down and just organize the mess that's in the skull right here that I can sort that out. And I was going to say something and I forgot it as well.
Just a little caveat to folks. We are recording this on a Monday. So it's always the Monday thing, right? I always feel like, oh, that's when the landscaper comes or the gardener or something happened the night before as the first day of the work week. So at time of recording, it's Monday. So sometimes the brain's a little mushy.
Yeah.
Did you have your coffee?
And also I did have my coffee, but also I can't have my AC on because,
right.
while recording. So I'm dripping buckets right now.
I turned mine off.
I think I might have something to do with it.
I turned mine off too. I do that all the time. And I'm going through perimenopause. So it's like hot flash city.
Yeah.
Ladies out there who are listening or those going through the flashes, they know what we're talking about. It's an interesting addition to my 40s.
God bless you, because it's a lot.
Yeah, we got to start sitting on like ice or something. Oh, you have a little fan on. You're doing the fan. Have you? I use those little fans all the time. The ones that you just I was at a Yankees game last month, and I'm the only one sitting there with one of those like little flamenco fans. Flamenco dancer fans.
Oh, I love it.
I'm like, y'all,
yeah.
You know what? This is just me.
Love that.
And I'm sure there are a lot of women.
Take it or leave it.
I'm sure there are a lot of women in that stadium that were like, oh, changes. Where the guys are like, who the heck are you? You're flamenco. Yeah. Right. So before we go any further. Yeah, exactly. That should be my theme song. Before we go any further, I just want to say thanks for being here again. And to those devoted Holistically Speaking listeners, or if you're just joining us for the first time, this is the first episode, just to remember that if you are enjoying this, if you're touched, moved, and inspired by Kathy's conversation with me, go ahead and pay it forward, share it with somebody else who might really resonate with this message. If you know somebody who is going through the end of life experience or has a family member, or maybe they need somebody to hold space for them, this is a really powerful conversation. And of course, check out Purpose Filter podcast and Kathy, and I'll share all of that in the podcast notes. And if you love it even more, leave a rating or review. I'm able to come back and do this week after week because of listeners like you. So I just want to hold space and say thank you to my listeners. And thank you to you, Kathy. This is just such a great conversation. I do want to go back a little bit though, and really talk somewhat about the pandemic. We've all been through it. A lot of people are walking away from the full-time work sector. They don't want to go back to the office. I think the numbers were like over 70% of people don't want to return to the office. And like I said earlier in this conversation, it's not an option for those in the healthcare. You can't work from home. No. I mean, there's telehealth, but that can only go so far. I'm able to do that. But for you, who needs to be in the hospital setting, how was the impact on the pandemic for you personally?
So like I was saying earlier, I had a really, really rough time. Yeah. I think it was part of it. It was, I knew that I was going to go into this work and it was going to be challenging, that I was going to deal with death and dying. Like I knew that. And I had come out of fellowship and I had the training and all of that stuff, but nothing prepares you for a pandemic, whether you're in healthcare or not, Mm-hmm. And so we were the first hit, like New York mm-hmm. was, the first in the country that was hit, and we had that huge wave. And I remember our list would normally be in like the 20s. And we had a staff of, 4 or 5 maybe. And our list swelled up to, I think it hit 89 at its peak within like a week or two. And it was just exponential. And we, onboarded a bunch of people. We had lovely people from all over the country and in our institution volunteer. And still, we had people who we couldn't see. Normally, in our list, we would have patients die maybe once, twice a week, and that was a normal week. But when the pandemic, it was like 4, 5, 6, 7 patients would die every single day, and some before we could even call them, speak to them, and everything was, there was no visitation. There was nothing. And we had to have all these conversations with people, with family members over the phone. And everything was new. People were like, what is this? Like, what is this virus? What's going on? People were scared and they were nervous and they were terrified, honestly. And to deal with that much emotion and grief and just at such a rapid pace was, it was kind of like, it was the darkest time of my life. Like when you're in it, you don't really realize it. You're kind of working on adrenaline and you just go, go, go. And it's not until you have a little lull, until there's some time for you to actually process what's going on, that you're like, holy shit, I got hit by a truck. We all did, right? And so I think it was around July, August, September that I really started feeling it. I would cry all the time. Like I think one day I cried 9 times, and that's a lot even for me. Just like at work, on the bus, in the bathroom, going home, all of this stuff. And I realize now, looking back, that I was having panic attacks. Like I would have to grip the sink while I was hyperventilating just to steady myself. Otherwise I felt like I would fall over. And at one point I remember thinking that I was like, you know what? I'm really glad that I don't have sedatives or sleeping pills in my house, because I just want to go to bed. I just want to sleep. I don't want to wake up. I don't want to deal with this anymore. I haven't told anyone this. Like at one point, I even kind of had to like stay away from the kitchen because I was like, I don't want to go near the knives because I don't think I'm going to do anything, but I don't really trust myself. And that was really, it was tough. Like I consider myself as one of the most well-adjusted people that I know. And it's not like a bravado thing. It's just like, I'm the fun one. I'm the happy one. I'm the chill one. And it was this sense of like, I squashed everything down. I had to intellectualize it. I'm like, I'm a doctor. I chose this. I am supposed to know how to deal with death and dying. And at the same time, my body and my mind were freaking out. And so there was this tension there that I couldn't figure out what to do. And so it spiraled. And, luckily I was able to get, a trauma-informed therapist that really helped me through all of that. And, and slowly, bit by bit, that brought me back to at least somewhat normal. Yeah. And it was coaching really that got me to see like, okay, you're back. This is what's possible for you. And so without those two, there was no way I would be here with you, speaking, interviewing, having my own podcast. None of that would exist if it weren't for that traumatic moment of my life, honestly.
While I wish you didn't go through all that, there's a part of me that thinks that's made you so much stronger. And as someone who's also a trauma-informed coach and therapist and working in holistic therapy, it's so important. And I feel like my client base grew in the field of healthcare because there was so much support that was needed. I found myself doing a lot of like pro bono work in that area because it's like, they not getting any support. You come home, I see the heads and the hands, like, how do I deal with this? How do I go back to that workplace when everybody else is trying to figure out it's hard enough to try to figure out how to do remote work from home stuff, but you're not even getting that opportunity. So I applaud you for being one of those healthcare professionals that did put their health first, because I do know it's not uncommon for those in the medical field to be like, I'm good. This is what I'm supposed to do. And it's like, y'all, if you're not holding space for yourself and you're not like helping your own self-care, how in the world can you hold space for others? You can't just go into tunnel vision 24/7, especially when it's something that we've never experienced before. I mean, the last thing I can think that was remotely close to this, just when I was solely a journalist and not even working in holistic care yet, was 9/11. I was on air during 9/11. I did not have the tools to know how to deal with that as a journalist, seeing what I saw, and the months that followed after that with the story after story after story that we had to cover. But then even in the pandemic, I feel like I was at least able to go home during the day. And my heart just went out to the healthcare providers that did not have that choice. But I would imagine for you, Kathy, and the many others out there, while it was a difficult time for you, it's made you so much stronger to where you can really be a powerful force to not only hold space for your patients differently maybe now, and I'll ask you that, I want to ask you about that, but also as a coach, taking these experiences with you, not just in the palliative care, but also as someone who's been through one of the worst world epidemics we've seen for 100 years, What is your takeaway? Yeah. So that would be my question. What is your takeaway that you have learned from being in that place?
That's a really great question. And, you brought up 9/11, and that was prior to the pandemic. Like, I think one of the most traumatic experiences of my life. Like, I was a student in high school, like 2 blocks away from there, so I saw everything. My friends saw people jumping, like it was just that. And I was 14, 15 at the time. But the takeaway that I want to share is exactly what you mentioned, and about self-care, about taking care of ourselves. What I love about palliative care and hospice is in our training, because we know that we're dealing with heavy stuff, with emotional patients and family members and situations and cases, we know that self-care is the vehicle by which we deliver the best care for others. We know that we have to be able to water our own plant. And I know you talk about this a lot as well. We have to be able to do that, because if we don't, then everyone else around us suffers, not just us. And no one lives in a vacuum. We are all interconnected. And by really taking care of ourselves, it's not selfish. And it's more than just like kale and yoga and manicures or whatever, right?
However, that is fun.
Self-care.
Do enjoy that.
It's amazing.
But there's a level.
We're not going to knock that. Yeah.
Yeah. You got to level up.
There's a level. That's surface level, right? That's the surface level. You want to get a little bit deeper. It's about setting boundaries. It's about saying no so that you can say yes to something else. It's about, just being in alignment with what's important to you, going back to our values. And I remember when I went out to seek therapy, I actually bargained them down from their rate, because I didn't want to be associated with an institution. And again, because of a lot of the things that healthcare practitioners are afraid about is like the backlash, right? And then the licensing and all this stuff, and which that's ridiculous. It needs to change. But I didn't want to be associated with that. So I found a private psychiatrist and therapy place. And they had a very high rate. And I didn't feel, even with my salary, that I could afford it, or I didn't feel like I could invest that amount of money in my own mental health, which looking back now is absolutely ridiculous, because I would not be here. had it not been for that. And so I hope that people who are listening can realize that that's all you have is your mental health. That's all you have is your own health. Without that, bar none, nothing happens. And so you have to take care of that. You have to be able to process your emotions. You have to be able to know how to respond to challenges in a way that's healthy, in the way that's going to help you grow, rather than cause you all this pain and suffering and overwhelm and frustration. And, I think that's what coaches are really great for. That's what therapists are really great for. That's what this whole kind of world of, personal development and growth is all about, is really to help people help themselves.
Yeah. I tell people all the time when they book a call with me to get a consultation or a discovery session, I'll say, what are you investing in? What's your investments now? Where are you putting some of your cash? And not to get personal, but I like to know these things, because the real follow-up to that is, so you do know that the number one ROI is YOU. Like, that's your main investment. If you're not investing in the self-care and your health, what are you giving? And like you said, we can do the massages. All those things are wonderful. Taking care of yourself, getting your nails done, going out for a run, going on a vacation. Yes, all are important. However, if it doesn't start here, pointing to the head, if it doesn't start in your mental and emotional well-being, it needs to begin there and kind of trickle down. And all too often we think it goes a different way, or I'll find it elsewhere. It will come from the outside. Oh, it doesn't come from the outside. Those are lovely little things to add to your little package of yumminess, but it's got to begin within, and I'm glad you found that. And I can't agree with you more, Kathy. Oh my gosh. The fact that people in the medical field have to be careful about seeking mental health because suddenly you're looked at as unstable because you're actually doing something is the most ridiculous thing. And it makes me so angry, because how are you going to support somebody if you're not taking care of yourself? Oh, now you're unstable, so you should be a doctor. Really? What about every other career on this planet? Or just a person who's a stay-at-home mom or dad, we all have, that should be a privilege for all of us, whether you can afford it or not. And I do hope that's changing. I really do. And more power to you for saying, you know what, this is way too important, and I'll figure out a way to make it work. But it also, it also goes back to the feeling that you didn't think you were worth spending that kind of money on.
Right. And I was thinking about what you were saying when in terms of the highest ROI is investing in you. It's like, are you going to think about the cost of the solution, or are you going to think about the cost of staying in the same situation that's making you miserable? Right. And in terms of the healthcare stuff, I mean, it's so ridiculous, just like this culture that we are entrenched in, where it's like, show up when you're sick, like pre-COVID at least, right? At least COVID has done that thing where it's like, okay, you're sick, stay home so you don't infect the rest of us. But before, I used to take it as a sense of pride. I literally would say, if I am standing, I will go into work. Right. And it's so silly, but I was so proud of myself. I would go in with a fever. I once went in, I had I was, losing fluids from both ends. I will not paint that picture further for you, but, I traveled and I was not doing well afterwards, and I got a really bad virus, stomach bug. And I took 2 days off from work, which was a huge deal for me. I'd never taken 2 in a row. I should have taken 5 because I could not, I could barely stand. And so that was my metric. And so I was like, I'm going into work. And I felt guilty because all of my colleagues would have to cover for me. And it took every single ounce of strength I had that day to not poop my pants. Like, to literally just keep my underwear clean. And like, I was like, how am I taking care of patients like this? I actually asked a nurse friend of mine, I was like, can you come down and give me fluids? And she did. And that was the only way that I made it through that day. But I've had people who, had to get fluids while they were in surgery. Like, it's so ridiculous that we're doing this to ourselves. Like, why do we feel the need to be martyrs just to make this work happen?
Yeah. I mean, if you're going to say the pandemic gave us something positive, it really made us think a number of things. How much time do I want to be away from my family and traveling, to and fro every day? What is it all for? Do I love the job that I'm doing? What value am I sharing on this planet? Like, what am I leaving? Even before this pandemic, I would think like, what do I want on my epitaph? What do I want my eulogy to be? Not that I'm looking for people to stand up there and say something, but I remember my dad's funeral almost 20 years ago, and that room was filled with people. My dad lived a pretty big life, and he was sick his entire life. I grew up with a sick father, diabetic, insulin dependent, constantly in the hospital. I spent most of my time doing homework at Montefiore Hospital waiting rooms. But when my dad passed, seeing that church filled with people and the stories people told about my father, I'm like, that's a man that lived, right? And it really goes back to like, this pandemic is really opening people's eyes to how do I want to live, not what do I want to say on my deathbed. It's less about the eulogy and it's less about the epitaph. It's more about, I could care less what's on that stone. Let me just live my life. I don't even need a stone, right? Mm-hmm. And
exactly.
So if anything, it sounds like there's a lot of growth and healing and learning that's made you a better doctor, a better human being, a better coach, a better woman, just a better wife, a better everything, so that you can just be better for you. Right?
Yeah. Yeah. And it's really, you hit it on the head. It's just, how do we want to live this life? How do we want to spend our time? Right? How we spend our time is how we end up living our life. And so if we want to live a life that's exciting and passionate and fun and meaningful and purposeful, then we have to spend our time doing things that are exciting, meaningful, fun, passionate, and fulfilling to us. And it's all about getting back in alignment, being authentically ourselves and saying like, you know what I thought was important really actually isn't in the grand scheme of things. And how am I going to steer my life in that direction?
Yep. Well said. All right. We've talked some heavy stuff today, but I always like to have a little fun with my guests. So I would love if we could do a little word association game that I call my rapid fire. I basically wrote down a bunch of words, and if you've listened to the podcast, you probably know I do this. I wrote down a bunch of words from our conversation, and I'm just going to throw out a word. Just come back with the first word that comes to mind. You ready for this?
Got it. I'm ready.
All right. I know you are.
Yeah.
Smarty pants. Okay, here we go. Death.
Life.
Life.
Living.
Joy.
Passion.
Bullying.
Not cool.
I'm going to give you 2 words for that one because it is not cool. Service.
Empathy.
Doctor.
The first word that came to mind was lawyer for some reason.
Sure. China.
Home.
And filter.
Purpose.
Good. Love it. Beautiful. Thank you so much for being here. I'm so elated that we were able to make this work. I know we had a summer between us. And I think when we first met, like I said, it was right before Memorial Day. And then I mentioned that my stepdad passed that first week of June. But I was so looking forward to talking with you further because I just truly believe in what you're doing, Kathy. And it's so good to know that there are doctors like you out there, and also those who can see outside of the hospital walls and want to do more and be more for others. So thank you for that.
Thank you so much. It's been such a pleasure to connect with you and just to know you and support what you're doing. And thank you for having me on. And this is just the beginning, right? So
it's just the beginning, girl. Okay, my friend, before I let you go, I am going to encourage you to check out Dr. Kathy Zhang's podcast, The Purpose Filter. Give it a listen. It is really beautiful. It's a place where you'll find those living lessons from the dying before it's too late. And while you're at it, connect with her on Instagram at The Purpose Filter. I will share links on the podcast page so you have every way of getting in touch with her. And we have some special news here. We are getting close to the 100th episode here on HIListically Speaking, just a few episodes away. So I am doing something really special. I'm making you a co-producer. And this is a chance for you to ask me anything you want. Your questions answered right here on the 100th episode. What do you want to know about me? What do you want to know about the guests on the show? Do you have questions about the work that I do? I talk a lot about journalism and media background, my work in holistic health. Whatever it is, I'm giving you a chance to lay it on me because I am an open book. All you have to do is reach out to me on social media, ask the question at Hilary Russo on any of my social media platforms. And you can also email me directly at HIListicallySpeaking@gmail.com. And if I answer your question on the 100th episode, I have a little surprise for you. So put your thinking cap on. This is your chance to ask anything you want. And of course, the music behind HIListically Speaking is produced and recorded by my dear friend Lipbone Redding. He's also the creator of all the music. And I record all of my episodes on Squadcast. If you're thinking about starting a podcast of your own, amplifying your voice, check out the link I share on the podcast page for a 7-day free trial. And I'm going to leave you with this today because we've shared a lot of quotes. So here's one more for you. This one comes from Robert F. Kennedy that said, "The purpose of life is to contribute in some way to make things better." And I imagine Bobby meant not only for others, but for yourself as well. So on that note, be kind to your mind and don't forget to laugh.
I know